my father is not praying at all, and he takes only from the Quran, and he does not accept the hadith. I wish to get married, but he is against Salafiyya. And my choice of husband, e.g. his race, I would not agree. What should I do in that regard as with regard to a wali? There's a number of things here that I would like to advise our sisters with in this regard. First and foremost, do not open up the doors of da'wah to your father at the time when you want to get married. And this, I find, begins to happen in some of our sisters who don't really have much knowledge, that for years they have been living with their parents and they haven't really been giving them da'wah. All of a sudden, she wants to get married now, and now she decides, actually my father is a kafir because he doesn't pray. This is not the way that we give da'wah. Where were these questions, my sister? Where was this question? A year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Only now that you've chosen someone to marry, and you want to marry him, now you've decided, actually my father, I want to establish the iqamatul hujjah upon him now. Why? Because now you want to marry this guy. No, my sister. Put your marriage to one side for a moment and focus upon giving da'wah to your mother and to your father. If your father is from the Qur'aniyin, meaning that he only believes in the Qur'an and he rejects the Sunnah completely and absolutely, the ruling upon those who reject the Sunnah in totality, then they are kuffar. That's the ruling upon. I'm not saying that your father is a kafir, because I don't know his condition, I don't know exactly what he believes. But that's the ruling upon the one who denies the Sunnah completely. As for the one who abandons the prayer after the iqamatul hujjah, after the establishment of the proof, then I take the position that such a person is no longer a Muslim. I take the position that such a person is no longer a Muslim, as the position of many of the ai*imma of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, past and present. And the hadith tend to support that point, even though they differ. Ahl Sunnah, they differ. So now give da'wah to your father. Furthermore, another piece of advice to such sisters who fall into that if your families, you find them, like for example, your families are traditional families, like traditional Somali family, traditional Bangladeshi family, traditional Indian family, traditional Moroccan family, and you know that they have raised you upon the tradition that they were raised upon themselves. So now as you grow up, they've raised you in a certain way. Now you bring someone to the house that is in complete contradiction to the culture that you have been raised in. And you want to marry him because you've already cut the deal with the guy. Right? And this is a danger. This is dangerous. That some of our sisters and our brothers, they fall into. They already make the deal to marry the man, then they go back to the mum and dad. So now she's already decided, I'm going to marry this man. Why? Because he's Salafi. And my heart has fallen for him, to the extent that her heart now is with this man that she's chosen to marry. Now she goes to her mum and dad, and they say, who have you chosen? And she says, well, I've decided to marry, there's a white brother in the community, he's been Muslim for a year or 2 years or 5 years, and I want to marry him. And they say, no, we want you to marry a Somali. She says, no, I want to marry him. Now there's a number of things that need to be looked at here. Number one, that sister, there's a car here, it's a Toyota Lucida, registration M781YWE. What are they blocking? You are blocking a lot of cars. You need to move this people carrier. M-Reg Toyota Lucida. There's a number of aspects here. Number one, that our sisters should not be having these clandestine meetings and these communications with brothers. Our sisters should not do that. In fact, I hold it to be haram that you have clandestine meetings behind the back of the wali and communications by telephone and text and email and whatever else that you have. Haram. Why? Because this is the right of the wali. You are taking the haqq of the wali. That's his right. That's the right of the father. So these behind the scenes and behind closed doors communications, they are not permissible. Thereafter, that this sister now decides that this is the one that she's going to marry. But it's not that your parents object to you marrying a Salafi, they don't. But because of their upbringing, and because of the fact that they don't understand what Salafiyya is, as far as they're concerned, you're a Somali from the Ishaqi tribe, or you're a Pakistani from such and such a tribe, or a Bengali from such and such a tribe, or an Afghani, or a Maghribi, or wherever you're from. And they see that we don't mind you marrying a Salafi, but we would prefer if you marry a Maghribiya or a Maghribi. Or if he's a man, a Maghribiya. That in and of itself should not become a barrier to you now seeking a man who is a Moroccan Salafi. Why is that a barrier to you? Does that mean that we justify what the parents have done? No, we don't justify that. But the Sharia does not forbid you from marrying, if you're a Somali woman, for example, the Sharia does not forbid you from marrying a Somali Salafi. Does it? There's no mani in the Shara of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no barrier. There's no forbiddance. If you're, for example, a Bengali sister, and your parents say, we prefer that you marry a Bengali man. For them setting that condition, of course, it's wrong. Because that's their background and that's their culture. Background and culture necessitates that for them. It's haram and it's wrong for them to be looking at people just on the basis of their colour. However, it's not haram for you to marry a Bengali Salafi. Is it? But what you've done is what? You want to now use their weakness, and this is the weakness that they have, to marry the man that you've chosen to marry because you fancy him and you find him attractive and you've already communicated with him and you've already texted him and you've already spoken to him and you've already decided that you want to marry him, my sister. So now you send the questions to the speakers and you say to them what? You say to them that my parents are racist and they don't allow me to marry outside of my culture. Possibly. Possibly. That may be the case. But it's not wajib for you to marry the man that you've chosen. Not wajib upon you. And how many times I've seen this happen? How many times? Yes, ideally, marry a Salafi. It doesn't matter what his background is, so long as he understands you and he understands your background. You understand him and you understand his background. And you are willing to live as he lives. And he is willing to live and understand your culture. And that is possible. And that has occurred many an occasion where people from different backgrounds, black marrying white, white marrying Pakistani, Somali marrying Jamaican, Jamaican marrying, Moroccan, happens. And it is possible and it works when both parties understand where they're coming from. How to live, how to behave, what the background is. So you don't now walk in and say, well, actually, in our culture, when we cook for the whole family. How come you've already cooked? You've sat down and you're just eating by yourself. Well, that's how I was raised in my family. Well, not in this house. And all of a sudden, an argument takes place and she wants a khula. Why? Because they don't understand each other's backgrounds. So yes, different cultures do marry within each other and it is good. Why? Because then we spread Salafiyya within different cultures and we understand that we have no racism whatsoever amongst the Salafiyun. But that's when you understand each other. Not that, I've always wanted to marry a tall, dark, black Jamaican. And the first one that walks through the door, that's the one that I'm going to marry. No. Go to your wali. Speak to him. Speak to your father. And tell him, when he says to you, now is the time, my daughter, it is time for you to marry. Do you have any particular choice? You can say yes. I want to marry one who has studied. I want to marry one who is, for example, from a certain Caribbean background, and so on and so forth. And the father may say, okay, in that case, I will do that for you. If he says, no, not over my dead body. Now you start negotiating with him. You don't start fighting him. You negotiate. And you say, okay, father, what would you accept? He said, well, I don't accept from that culture. Then you explain to him that racism is not permitted in the Sharia. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came to wipe out all of this type of racism. And then you give da'wah, and give da'wah, and give da'wah, before you start bringing that person in front of your father. Give him da'wah, give him da'wah, give him da'wah. It may take time, but this is your father and this is your mother. The Prophet ﷺ, he said to one of his companions, take to the feet of your mother, for indeed paradise is there. The Prophet ﷺ, when he was asked, who has the most right of my companionship? He said, your mother. He said, who after that? He said, your mother. He said, who after that? He said, your mother. He said, who after that? Your father. So now they have rights. The man that you're marrying is a stranger. Complete stranger. The Prophet ﷺ was asked a question. He said, the companion said to him, I have sadaqah to give. Should I give it to my relative or should I give it to other than them? The Prophet ﷺ said that when you give sadaqah to your relative, you get two rewards. One for the sadaqah and one for connecting the ties of kinship. Kinship is important in religion. It's part of our deen. That's why you find so many hadith and so many ayat talking about kinship. So therefore this is your mother and your father. So yes, you may wish to marry. For example, you're a Maghribiyya. I don't want to focus on one race and say, you only focus on Pakistanis or blacks or this. No. You may be a Maghribiyya, you may be a Moroccan sister. You find that you prefer a white brother from Albania. No problem. Good. No problem whatsoever. Now go and work on your father. Deen, Tawheed, Sunnah. Teach him how the Prophet ﷺ was. Take him to the durus. Say, my father, there's a conference this weekend, why don't you come along? Sheikh Fulan and Fulan will be speaking. Buy him books in Arabic. The books in the language that he understands. This is how you work. And there is no harm. Wallahi, there is no haraj on a Somali sister to marry a Somali Salafi brother. It is not wajib upon you to marry a white brother, or marry an Albanian, or marry a Yemeni, or marry a Jamaican. It's not wajib. Not wajib at all. So don't put yourselves into that category where now you go out fatwa shopping to get out of the relationship with your father, so you may wish to marry that person, and you say, my father is a racist. Possibly. But be patient. Be easy. Take some time. Take effort. If at the end of all of your trying, right, and you cannot stomach, even though you are Bengali, you cannot stomach looking at a Bengali Salafi. Just can't stand them. I don't know how. Right? Because I'm sure there are some handsome Bengalis around. Right? I'm sure. They are. But let's say, khalas, you just don't want Bengali. So what now? In that situation, go and ask an alim, Sheikh Ubayd, Sheikh Fawzan, go and ask Sheikh Muhammad ibn Hadi, Sheikh Zayd al-Madkhali. Ask one of the scholars. This is my situation. What should I do? Thereafter, inshallah, get your fatwa. But please don't believe for a moment and don't justify wrong behavior and then ascribe it to Salafiyya. I think really we should call it a day. Okay, can I just remind the sisters, every conference we get complaints that the sisters can't hear the lecture, they can't hear the question, they can't hear the answer, and they're wondering what they're even doing at the conference. Why? Because some of you ladies turn up and you really come here just as a social event, and you decide to socialize as soon as the speaker starts saying Inna alhamdulillah, and then you decide that this is the time that you're going to start socializing. Come on, sisters, have some manners.